Jesus very much defines neighbor as someone who's different from us because, he could have told us to love our immediate family members. He could have told us to love our close friends. Those would have been easier commandments to follow for sure. But he told us to love our neighbors. That's inherently a public thing. And he went a step further and told us to think about neighbor as the person who's the hardest to love, the outcast, the outsider, the enemy. And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to love your enemies. I fail at it all the time, but it is what we are all challenged to try to do. And honestly, I think in this country, if we could learn how to love our opponents, if we could learn how to love people we disagree with, that really could be the key to saving this American experiment, saving democracy all over the world, is how do we love each other through our differences, through our disagreements. That really is the challenge. It's incredibly hard to do, but I think it's probably the most essential thing for us to do at this moment in our history.
Hi, it's Liz. Welcome to Liz's Coffee Connection podcast. And I am excited because today I have a young leader in the United States of America who is really turning people back into wanting to know how they can get involved. And one of the reasons I started this podcast is because I was looking at our world and seeing that there was a lack in communication between different sides and different opinions. And for me, this was a moment a few years ago to come and say, how do we talk together? And how do we share what I think are the 4 H's: home, heart, humanity, and hope? Because if you can talk about those things and you can somewhat keep out the 2 P's, politics and policy, you can actually get along and try to get a lot done. And the person I'm going to introduce has done that, worked across the aisle, and I think it keeps those ideas in his northern star, shall I say. So I want to welcome, for our virtual coffee, James Talarico from Texas. He's a member of the Texas House of Representatives. And I just want to say thank you for coming and joining me today for our virtual coffee.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here.
So I always start with what people have in common who I've had on this podcast. And I've had people Democrat, Republican, young and old, and diverse, very diverse. And the part that I was thinking about when I was looking at you was, for me, the last few years on this podcast and in my life, I have been so much focused on this 3 words: love thy neighbor. And I've had to challenge myself because of what my life has been through and what I see in our world right now. And it's a challenge, but I still keep that as my sort of one of my mantras. And I know that you, as a leader and as a theologian and as a human also, I've seen have really used that as what you're kind of basing a lot of what you do on. So while we come from it from a different place, I do think that just that is something that is really powerful. And I would love for you to talk a little bit as we introduce who you are, that phrase and what it means to you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. My granddad was a Baptist preacher in South Texas on the Texas-Mexico border. And when I was real little, he told me that we're supposed to follow Jesus's 2 commandments: love God and love neighbor. And that second commandment, to love thy neighbor as thyself, is really what has guided my journey in public service. First as a public school teacher on the west side of San Antonio, as a public official in the state legislature, and now as a candidate for the U.S. Senate. I am trying in politics to love my neighbor through public policy. I'm trying to make their lives easier and better, trying to lower the cost of their medications, their housing, their childcare. I'm trying to love my neighbor at scale. And what's beautiful about that teaching is that you find it in all the great world religions. Obviously, Jesus gave us that teaching in Christianity, but he got it from his religion, Judaism. You also see it in Islam. You see it in Buddhism. You see it in Hinduism. You see it in many ethical frameworks that are not theistic, that are philosophical. And so the idea, that golden rule that we want to treat others as we want to be treated, that we're supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves, that's something you find across traditions, across the world, across time. And to me, that means there's a wisdom there that really transcends religious boundaries and cultural boundaries. And it's what I've tried to live my life by.
I think it just gives us an understanding of that we do actually have so much more that in common than what divides us, and we sometimes have to bring us back to that moment. Um, and I was laughing because you also spoke on Ezra Klein, you spoke on Joe Rogan, and those are two very different journalists and very different podcasters, and yet at the same time in each one they were authentic and there was so much to talk about, and you bonded with each of those two gentlemen.
That's exactly right. In my tradition, my faith tradition, you know, Jesus very much defines neighbor as someone who's different from us because, he could have told us to love our immediate family members. He could have told us to love our close friends. Those would have been easier commandments to follow for sure. But he told us to love our neighbors. That's inherently a public thing. And he went a step further and told us to think about neighbor as the person who's the hardest to love, the outcast, the outsider, the enemy. And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to love your enemies. I fail at it all the time, but it is what we are all challenged to try to do. And honestly, I think in this country, if we could learn how to love our opponents, if we could learn how to love people we disagree with, that really could be the key to saving this American experiment, saving democracy all over the world, is how do we love each other through our differences, through our disagreements. That really is the challenge. It's incredibly hard to do, but I think it's probably the most essential thing for us to do at this moment in our history.
I agree. I agree. And that's what we're here for today. And I know that you're doing each and every day. I'll say this funny part, which is there's some nights where I go to bed and I'm so tired and I'm like, I can't do it anymore. Then you wake up the next day and you start fresh and you keep that in your mind and you can keep moving forward.
That's exactly right. Because people throughout our history, they faced worst challenges with a lot less than what we have. You think about civil rights marchers, you think about labor organizers, you think about farm workers. I mean, these were people who had the deck stacked against them. They weren't supposed to be successful, and they found a way to persevere, to keep moving forward, and ultimately were able to win change in this country. And I think that's what we have to take inspiration from in this moment. Even when things are dark, even when things are difficult, even when the deck is stacked against us, we should look at our history for inspiration on how to put one foot in front of the other. I've said before that action is the antidote to despair, and it's really hard to wring your hands when you're rolling up your sleeves. There is something about doing something, about action, that keeps us from falling into that hopelessness.
I'm going to go back to James as a kid because I like to hear about your childhood a little bit and what it was growing up. You grew up in Texas and you're from Round Rock, Texas. And you grew up with a single mom who was very, from what I understand, powerful and also beautiful and loving. And I would just love to know what it was like growing up at home and school, because that is something that everyone can also relate to, what it was like to grow up.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I was born to a single mom, as you mentioned, who was a preacher's daughter from Laredo. She left home at 19. She moved up to the big city, Austin, Texas, and that's where she met my birth father, a 21-year-old high school dropout whose drinking problem sometimes led to violence. And one night after I was born, he became abusive again. And that night, my mother's love rose to meet it. And she packed all our stuff into her little Ford Escort. She drove me to the hotel where she worked. She begged the manager to let us stay in one of the rooms until we found this little apartment in East Austin. And there wasn't room for a nursery, so I slept in a crib in her closet. And she was so proud of that closet. She decorated it with toys and pictures. No one was going to tell her it wasn't a nursery. And she showed me what it means to stand up to bullies. She showed me what love really does in moments of crisis. And that is stand up for the vulnerable, stand up for the defenseless. And she did that with an incredible amount of courage. She didn't have a job. She didn't have money. She didn't have a college education, but she found a way to provide for me. She ended up moving to a different hotel to find work and be able to provide for me. And when she was in the lobby of that hotel, she ran into a young man named Mark Talarico, and she fell in love with him. He fell in love with her. He then fell in love with me and decided to adopt me and gave me his last name and raised me as his own. And meeting Mark Talarico was the best thing that ever happened to us. And they still live in that same house in Round Rock where we grew up, and are still together to this day, and very involved in the campaign. And I couldn't be, I hit the lottery when it came to parents. Both my mom and my dad are extraordinary parents, and now they're grandparents. My younger sister Madeline and my brother-in-law Matt welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world just 3 years ago, and she is the joy of all of our lives. And so my parents are really enjoying their new career as grandparents.
And your career as an uncle, so that has to be
That's
also.
right. Which I mean, I really think it's the best job in the world, from what I can tell. I get to do all the fun stuff. I get to play around, and then when she gets fussy, then I just head out. So
Yeah, okay.
exactly,
Exactly.
exactly. So yeah, no, my and my niece Jane she's turned into this very curious, very kind, very silly toddler. And she really is getting a kick out of the campaign. She's learned to identify the last name on all the signs, and I think she's really enjoying seeing her Uncle Jimmy on her TV set.
Oh,
Uh,
that's great.
yeah,
That's
no, it is wonderful.
I teared up a little bit just when you talked about your father and your mother and the love, and it's a really special story. And I didn't know this. I never heard the part about where they met in the hotel lobby, and that's really
Yeah,
nice,
yeah,
special.
yeah. Love. I mean, love. I feel like sometimes we treat love as a sentimental feeling, as something that's weak and passive and neutral. And in my experience, love is the strongest force in the universe. And my mom showed that night in that very dangerous situation. She showed that love does what it takes to stand up for people, even if that means putting yourself in between the bully and the bullied. And I've tried to live by that example in the state legislature, and I've tried to live my life that way. Love does win in the end, even when it's temporarily defeated. It is stronger than hate. It's stronger than violence. It is stronger than division. Love really is the most powerful thing, and if we bet on love, we're not going to lose.
I agree. I agree. Now I'm going to ask you a funny question about school. I read that you also played Danny Zuko in Greece.
I did. I did.
So
Yes.
you were like a thespian in a little bit, and then you also
Well,
did debate. Like, how
well,
did all this happen?
yeah, I was actually, I first got involved in choir as a kid who grew up in the church. I was involved in our church choir. And so I got involved in choir at school, in middle school and in high school. So that was really where I spent most of my time. And that's how I kind of got roped into musical theater eventually. And you're right, my senior year, I was Danny Zuko in Greece, and had a blast. It's a great show, and I had a ton of fun. Really, theater is and musical theater is helpful for kids because it forces you to inhabit a character and to put yourself into someone else's shoes, and it really teaches you about empathy and understanding other people. And I feel like I learned a lot from my time in choir and theater and debate. Obviously, those things really did prepare me for the work that I do now.
Do you remember any of the songs that you sang in Greece?
Well, I mean, I remember the songs, what they were called, but I don't remember.
I'm not going to put you on the spot to sing. Do not worry. Do
But
not
yes,
worry.
the movie is what people really remember from Greece, the John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John movie, which I loved. The musical is a little different from the movie. There's some songs that are not in the stage version, and some songs that are sung by other characters. So, for instance, like Grease Lightning, which is like one of the famous songs from Greece, is actually not sung by Danny Zuko in the musical. It's sung by Kaniki, the sidekick. So there are some differences, but there are also some similarities.
Yeah. And in school, high school, elementary school, did you have a teacher or teachers that really inspired you, saw your potential, and kind of stood out in your life to this day as really being there for you?
Yes, absolutely. I actually struggled in elementary school and middle school with sometimes had behavior issues. It's why I've always had a soft spot for the troublemakers. When I was a teacher, I always had a soft spot for those kids who were behavior challenged. In the legislature, I did a lot of work to help kids who struggled with behavior, and then kids who got because of those behavioral challenges got caught up in the justice system. And I did a lot of work on juvenile justice. And it's because I, like my mom, had kind of a rebellious spirit. Still have that to some degree. It was my fifth grade teacher, Miss Idecker, who told me that if I can channel that rebellious spirit into more productive avenues, that I can be very successful. And I'm very thankful for her for not writing me off and believing in me. And it's what when I got to middle school, I started getting involved in extracurriculars, and things like debate helped me channel those that rebelliousness into something that was productive. And because of that, I instead of getting referrals and detentions, which is what I got a lot when I was younger, suddenly because I was channeling it into something productive, I was getting trophies at debate tournaments. And so that's what we have to do with our kids, especially our kids who are a little more rebellious and who have more of a wild spirit. Those kids can do great things if we can teach them how to harness that instinct. And I'm thankful that I had educators like Miss Idecker who did that for me.
Yes, and you were a teacher, and I'm sure that you also understood that students really just want to be seen and heard. It doesn't mean that you can fix things, but if they feel seen and heard, they will respect you as a teacher. And that's what I think builds the relationship. It's not about what you're learning in the class that day as much as the relationships, because I know that for myself.
It's always about relationships, everything. Certainly in the classroom, my mentor teacher, when I first started as a teacher, told me that kids aren't going to care what you know until they know that you care. It is connecting here before we're connecting here. And I've taken that into the political world. I try to always connect with people at a heart level before I'm talking about public policy or my platform. I really do think that's the key, is connecting at that deeper level.
That made me also wonder, you also have worked, and again, this isn't about politics and policy, but you have worked across the aisle. You have worked with, I know you have another James, and you had a James caucus, the James Dem, the James Republican, but you worked on things that were good for the people. And that is what the purpose. Can you talk a little bit about that? Again, work together with somebody who, if you did not reach out and have a relationship, they would be otherized, as opposed to we're in this together.
Well, because my faith taught me about servant leadership. There's a part in the New Testament when Jesus tells his followers that whoever wants to be a leader among you has to first be a servant, that you have to lead from behind, rather than being this is also one of my mentor teachers told me this. You don't want to be, as a teacher, you don't want to be a sage on the stage. You want to be a guide on the side, which I always thought was really helpful in understanding servant leadership. It's not about your own glory or getting attention for yourself or getting power for yourself. It is about serving others. It is about making other people's lives better and centering their needs first and foremost. And that's guided my work in the legislature. And it's why I've been able to work across the aisle, because my goal is not to score points for myself or my party. My goal is to get something done for my constituents. And in Texas, that means working with Republicans. They have a majority in the state legislature. And so if I wanted to get stuff done, if I wanted to deliver for my people back home, that meant working across the aisle in a bipartisan way. And I was able, it was such a blessing to work in the legislature as a Democrat, because it forced me to get outside my bubble. It forced me to enter into a relationship with people who I don't agree with. And there's a lot of time in the legislature when you are sitting around with your colleagues on the floor and you get to know each other. You get to bond. You get to meet their family members. You get to meet their spouses. And you learn a lot about people in that kind of environment. And you learn to love these people, even when you're disagreeing on profoundly on very difficult topics, life or death topics. You find a way to still see their humanity through those disagreements and through those fights. And I think that's what our country needs now. We're going to have disagreements. We're a big country with diverse needs and differences of opinion, but we've got to still find a way to see our common humanity through those disagreements. And holding those two things together, I think, is the key to moving this country forward.
You are also in a seminary program, and you talked about it, like your religion and is so ingrained in who you are. And I know that you bring it to the work you do, but you also don't believe that you also, excuse me, you also do believe that there is a separation of church and state. Can you explain that? Because I always think about like it's not that clear. And to people when they see the two things, there's the two things can be true. You can be very much your religion is so important to you, and yet you also know that when you go to work in the public work that it's not you as a religious person, but it's you as a leader.
Well, in the very beginning of our conversation, I said that Jesus gave us two commandments: to love God and to love neighbor. And so those two commandments have guided my life. And those two commandments, they challenge each other, they enrich each other, they sustain each other. If you're just focused on loving your neighbor, if you're focused on action, then it can be really easy to burn out if you're not rooted in something deeper, whether that's God or religion or whatever it is, if it's meditation or philosophy or whatever ethics, you have to be rooted in something deeper than just the news of the day, because it's really hard to love your neighbors in a difficult environment like this, in difficult times like this. The civil rights movement was very much rooted in spirituality. So was the labor movement and the women's rights movement, and the farm workers movement. So rooting ourselves in something deeper is important. But it's also tempting to then just go lock yourself in a monastery somewhere and meditate all day and never take any action. And that's also unhealthy. So you have to balance prayer and action and bring them together. And that's what I've tried to do in my life. And when I was in my second term in the legislature, it was a really hard session. We broke quorum to be able to stop a voter suppression bill. That was when they passed a total abortion ban in Texas, which is killing women in our state as we speak. They passed a permitless carry bill to allow anyone to carry a gun without any kind of documentation, any kind of permit. So it was a really hard session, and I started to lose faith on the impact I was making. And so I decided to fall back on that first commandment, to love God. And that's when I decided to enroll in seminary. And for me, my seminary journey is kind of balancing out those two spheres: the public action sphere of loving your neighbor and the private spiritual sphere of loving God. And those two things I've tried to hold together, and it's helped keep me balanced. And to your second point, in the legislature, I never thought I would talk so much about religion, but I was forced to because of the rise of Christian nationalism, the rise of theocracy, trying to force my religion down the throats of my Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Sikh, Hindu, atheist, agnostic neighbors. I'm called to love those neighbors the way I love myself. And I don't want any religion being forced down my throat. So why would I force my religion down theirs? That is not love. And so I try to stand up for those neighbors who are not religious or who have a different religion. And it's why I have fought so hard against Christian nationalism, why I have fought so hard for the separation of church and state. Because I was raised to believe that boundary in our First Amendment between church and state is a sacred boundary. And it was, if you look back through American history, it was Protestant Christians who fought for that separation of church and state. The first time Thomas Jefferson uses the phrase, a wall of separation between church and state, it was in a letter to the Danbury Baptists, because they were fighting so hard for that separation. Baptists in particular were ferocious advocates for that separation, because the separation of church and state doesn't just benefit the state. It doesn't just benefit our democracy, although it certainly does. It also benefits the church, because when the church gets too cozy with political power, it loses its prophetic voice, its ability to speak truth to power. Dr. King, someone who also, I think, blended religion and politics in a very healthy way, he said that the church is not supposed to be the master of the state. It's not supposed to be the servant of the state. it is supposed to be the conscience of the state. It has to speak truth to power. It has to, and I think, I'm a Protestant, but I think you're seeing that with our new Pope, Pope Leo, who has very courageously spoken truth to power in his role as a religious leader. And so we have to be able to preserve that. And the separation of church and state helps us, protect the integrity of both.
Yes. If I were to say, you have young people, but you're young, but you also have young people that are around you, and what kind of advice do you give them? Not specifically about running for an election or being in politics, but what do you give them about feeling like they are leaders? Because I think our society is actually needs young people to believe that they all potentially have leaders, they're leaders, but that it's very hard because it's not set up for that. But I know that if you have the opportunity to speak with young people, the words that you share with them have a lot of meaning. So in this moment, what would you be saying to young people who need to be encouraged or to find the place to rise and become leaders?
Well, once a teacher, always a teacher. Even in this campaign, we have a lot of bright, talented, young staff members who are working for this campaign. I often say that I'm one of the oldest people on the campaign, and I'm 36. So it tells you how young the team is, which is great because I really believe that's who's going to save us. I really think it's going to be, millennials and Gen Zers who are stepping up to take ownership of this democracy, who are going to lead us into the future and who are going to remake this broken political system in their own image. And I take very seriously investing in those leaders, in mentoring those young leaders. In my first campaign for the State House back in 2018, I built a program called Camp Campaign, and it was a summer program to teach high school and college kids the ropes of politics, the nuts and bolts of campaigns, teach them how to organize, how to lead, and invest in them. A lot of times political campaigns just take that young labor, they take advantage of it, right? Sometimes they don't even pay for that labor, and they just put them to work and don't invest in them. But I was trying to do something different in my first campaign. I was trying to actually invest time and money in them so they could grow into who they're supposed to be, into the leaders of tomorrow. And now we're doing that in the Senate campaign, and we're going to have a similar program this summer across the state of Texas for young people to learn what servant leadership looks like. What does it mean to be an organizer? What does it mean to make change in your community? And that is transferable. It's not just in a political campaign. You can use that in any field, whether it's activism or business or media. These leaders need to learn how to lead with integrity and focus on service above everything else.
Yeah, I think it's a great program, and we should see that across the country just to get young people, because you need some education, but it is something that I believe will make us a stronger country, which is people understanding how it works. I've been in places where people don't realize that if you don't like something or you like something, you should call your leader, whether it's your council member, your mayor, or even national leaders. Call them, call their office, because it doesn't matter what the issue is, but if it's important to somebody, that you need to speak out. And young people didn't, the people that I was speaking with in a few of the states had no idea that even made any difference.
Right. We have so much work to do to make sure that young people have the knowledge and skills to take ownership of this democracy and to lead us into the future. It's why I've fought so hard for civics curriculum in our schools and empowering young people with that knowledge so they can lead us into the future.
Okay. Now, James, we're going to get to know you on some really fun levels, rapid questions, and we're going to start. What is your favorite sound?
Oh, my favorite sound. I talked about my baby niece, Jane. It is her laugh.
Yeah, it's a great one. Favorite color?
Navy.
Favorite scent or smell?
I would have to say my mom makes the best tortilla soup. And so I would say it's the smell of her tortilla soup on the stove in the kitchen back home.
Sounds good. One of my other questions is your favorite food. Is that your favorite food?
Well, I'll try to give a different answer for that. It is one of my favorite foods. But I would have to say breakfast tacos. Growing up in the Austin area and teaching in San Antonio, those two cities are known for their breakfast tacos. And if there was one food I had to eat for the rest of my life, it would definitely be breakfast tacos.
That's a good one. It's a good one. You
Yeah.
get everything in there and you just wrap
No,
it up. It's
that's right.
delicious.
That's right. It could be breakfast. It could be lunch. It could be dinner. Yeah.
Yeah. What is your favorite word?
I love words because I was a language arts teacher and I love to read. And this word is coming to mind because I love the way it sounds and the way what it means. But I love the word wistful. There's just some words that like in different languages that like hit on a certain feeling that's hard to describe, and wistful is one of those words. And it's also an onomatopoeia. It kind of sounds, the word itself sounds like what it means. So I don't know. That's just the word that came to my head. So
I like it.
that's
It's a
go
good
with, yeah.
word. It's a good word. And you speak other languages? You speak Spanish?
Más o menos.
Más o
My,
menos. Okay.
yes, we actually just rolled out our Spanish language social media channel, so we can reach Spanish speakers in Texas. And the introductory video is me in my imperfect Spanish welcoming people to the new channel. So folks should check out Talarico in Español if you want to see our stuff in Spanish.
Okay, well, it's something also to keep working on, getting your Spanish better. Because in our day and age, I think it's really important that people understand and speak Spanish, as well as other languages, but Spanish in particular. I grew up and we learned Spanish, and it was a language I've spoken my whole life. And I still break my tongue sometimes, but I understand that it's like a tool. It's another part of who we are.
And in my experience, Texans, Tejanos, Spanish speakers, they really appreciate the effort. Even if it's not perfect, they do want to see you try, and that's what I'm doing on the trail.
Good. Keep trying, and keep speaking. And also just speaking to different people. And I think it goes back to being heard and being seen. Sometimes, if you speak in a language that is very easy for them to understand, they may speak English, but for them to hear it in a language that is who they are, their roots, it's also important. Yeah. Okay. Biggest cheerleader.
Well, I've talked a lot about my mom, so I'm going to say my dad, my adoptive dad, Mark Talarico. He's so good about always, I did an interview with CBS on Monday, and he watched it and he was like, "I thought it was your best interview yet." And that just, having someone like that who's just constantly cheering you on and making an effort to share that with you, especially when it's your dad, there's no greater gift.
I love that. Okay, if you had a day off, which I know you haven't, and you're not going to have for a long time.
Yeah, it sounds so great, though.
It sounds great. Like if you could sit around and binge watch, what would you be watching on TV right now?
I really loved the first season of The Last of Us, I think is what it's called. It was like a post-apocalyptic thing, and I think there's a second season that came out a few months ago, and I have obviously not had a chance to watch it. So I'd probably watch the second season of The Last of Us.
Okay. And if you could have coffee with anyone right now, besides me, in the world that we're living in that you haven't met, who would that be?
I think I would say Pope Leo. We talked about him earlier, but I have just so admired, how he has led at this moment of crisis on a whole host of issues. And, given that he's an American too, I think we would have a lot to discuss. And I would love to hear his opinions about the American church and young people and how religion needs to change if it's going to be a gift to the future.
That's somebody that I would love to have coffee with as well, Pope Leo. Maybe we'll go together.
Okay, all right. You bring me and I'll bring you. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, we're going to reach out after this call.
Yes.
And by the way, I actually think Pope Leo is somebody that would really enjoy meeting you, really enjoy meeting myself, like who we are as people, just because I think that he is doing that work, which is how do you bridge together? How do you talk about love thy neighbor? And that is who Pope Leo is. I believe after everything is said and done, you go to the most important part. And I think that's who he is.
Completely agree.
Yeah. Sorry, we diverged, but
I know,
Okay, this is a silly one. Favorite household chore?
Yeah, raking the leaves. I have a garden at home. It's actually not much of a garden, but I love spending time outside and cleaning up the deck. I have a deck in my backyard, so I love doing a little bit of outdoor work.
Nice. Favorite book or book you're right now that's sort of in your life?
I would say my favorite fiction book is probably Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. It's a book that's meant a lot to me throughout my life. And to me, it just captures so much about what's beautiful in Texas, that sense of friendship, Texas is the friendly state, or at least we used to be known as the friendly state. And I feel like Lonesome Dove really captures what that means. And it's just a great read. I've read it many times, and you can always go back to it. It's a great adventure. So Lonesome Dove, highly recommend it.
Okay. One more, favorite music do you have that you listen to if you're working out or running on the run?
I love so many kinds of music. I grew up listening to 1980s country western music, George Strait and and Brooks and Dunn and Clint Black, um, and even into the 90s, the Dixie Chicks and Garth Brooks, and then I really love a lot of the new Texas country artists. Casey Musgraves is a favorite of mine, and I think there's so many talented young country musicians that are coming up. So I would say country western.
Okay. And what is James's superpower?
My superpower. Well, I do think I was a really good teacher. I think I'm a good elected official, and I think I'm a good candidate because I know how to communicate with people. I know how to take complicated things and boil it down in a way that's understandable. And so I think communications is a skill that I have, and I've tried to use it well.
My last question I ask everyone is, what does joy mean to you, and what brings you joy? And if you feel joy, how do you share it, and what do you think about the power of joy?
Well, I think joy is often confused with happiness, and they're actually two different things in my life. Joy is finding that calm in the storm. Um, Joy is finding peace even in heartbreak. It's finding light in darkness, and so that there is something about joy um, that is not always happy, um, but it is kind of a center. I heard this, and I don't know if it's scientifically accurate, but I always heard that when there's a hurricane, that whales and kind of the great beasts of the ocean, they go so deep where they can find safety. And I feel like we all have to kind of do that in our lives, especially in times like this. Like we have to go deeper and find a joy that can't be taken from us, a peace that can't be disturbed, while still engaging with the world and loving our neighbors and protecting our neighbors. But that joy, it's a stubborn thing, and it can persist even when you aren't happy. And so, I've tried to find that joy, even on the campaign trail, and I find it everywhere. And I actively look for it. Psychologists will tell you, like, you find what you're looking for. I have a practice that I'll tell you about. On my iPhone, I love taking pictures. I'm an amateur photographer, very amateur, but I like to. In your iPhone, you can like photos, and so I always try to take a photo during the day of like a thing that I find that's beautiful, an artwork or a person or a moment, and I try to capture it, and then I collect them in my liked photos. And so when I'm feeling a little hopeless or feeling a little bit of despair, I go back through those moments of joy, those moments of light in the darkness, and it keeps me putting one foot in front of the other. So that's how I find joy and what joy means to me.
Okay, well, I'm going to just take a little bit from that to end this by saying, like, this conversation is sort of captured the joy that I think people will listen to, and I hope take in their daily life, sort of like what you just said for you in the photo, but that this conversation, this 30 minutes, is something that people will take with them. Because I do think that there are a lot of whales we're a lot of people that are burrowing down, and we need to find joy so that when we do come up and we are in this world that is complicated and challenging and with a lot of negativity, that we will have that strength. So I wanted to say thank you. And it's been joyful, but not just on a top level, but also on a deep level, really getting to know more about you and having this time with you. And I just say thank you. Thank you so much for what you're doing for this conversation, but what you're doing for so many people in Texas and around the country.
Well, thank you, Liz. I've done a lot of interviews, and this is certainly one of my favorites that I've done. So thank you for creating this unique space and this unique platform. And it was a joy to be here.
Thank you. Hi, Hi, it's Liz. Thanks for hanging out with me on Liz's Coffee Connection. Before you go, do yourself a favor. Turn off the doom scrolling, dial down the noise, and start joy scrolling, because there's a lot of good in the world. People are kind, joy is real, and you don't have to miss it. If this episode made you smile or feel a little lighter, share it with someone who could use that lift, because sharing really is caring, and we could all use a little extra joy these days. Have a beautiful day, and don't forget to subscribe to Liz's Coffee Connection. Until next week's coffee, ciao.